Folks, there's no time like the present to start the wheel squeaking. Welcome to the Squeaky Wheel. With me, as always, my very good friend, the President, Lawrence Gervais. And I'm going to invite our guest right a few seconds. One of the exciting things, Lawrence, about this week is it happens to be Elvis week. So for all of our listeners, I hope you're out there right now putting on your Elvis costumes, because I'm a little surprised that I'm not wearing one based on the fact that I've been down to and done that pilgrimage a couple of times. And it also happens to be the National Nonprofit Week. So for all of you people out there, if you're looking for a place to sponsor, reach out to those groups that you've wanted to donate a few dollars to in the past, and make sure you let them know that you're there to support them. Now, Lawrence, this is a very exciting episode for me as far as I'm concerned, because a very good friend of ours and somebody who's very connected within our community is with us today, Saxon DeCocq. Now, Saxon, I want to give our listeners a little bit of an awareness of who you are. You've probably done 500 different videos, presentations, community-driven shows, films. You know, we're going to talk a little bit more about the fact that you did 3 seasons of a ghost hunting episode show. I'm real keen about this one. But with us today is our friend Saxon, who is one of the owners of 3 Story Pictures. And, you know, I was reading a little bit about, because again, I'm engaged with your company and engaged with the people within your industry. Focus on bringing life stories that are meaningful, that have a personal connection to, whether it's female-driven dramas, exploration of Métis heritage, environmental stewardship, pop culture. I have a whole bunch of questions that I want to ask you about your journey, but tell us just a little bit about 3 Story so we can get our listeners interested.
I think you summed it up pretty well there. I am lucky enough to be partnered with 2 amazing partners in Elma Kekrin and Hannah Hermanson. They allow me to do a lot of creative stuff and come up with ridiculous ideas for television series.
And you're on the right show for us.
And then occasionally something will sort of stick and land, and we'll run with it. And try to get funding around it, and then see if we can take it to the next level and get it to a broadcaster and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think he kind of skimmed over your title. So are you a producer, filmmaker? What are you?
Thanks. I'm the creative producer. I'm also a producer, and then I'm partner of the company as well.
Now, one of the things that I've always been a bit confused about, and hopefully as we go through our conversation, is what does it take to go, because we see this after every show we ever watch, right? Anybody who watches television, there's the producer, there's the executive producer, there's the co-producer, there's all these different levels. As we get to this conversation about where your skill set came from, I think you're quite comfortable and you're quite proud of the fact that we've attended events together, that there's a Métis history there. There's a Métis heritage. And Lawrence and I often talk, and I know our listeners have heard this many times, about my journey when it comes through my understanding. When did I not feel like an imposter? And how did my dad influence a little bit of the conversation about how I was trying to understand identity? Do you mind? Are you comfortable with taking us through a little bit about your personal journey? Because it's so different for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. Like, I am on a personal journey to understand my Métis heritage, and that really closely coincides with the work that I do. As I make discoveries, I then want to sort of translate those discoveries into either documentaries or docuseries. So I discovered, it was 6 years ago now, that my biological father passed away. And at that time, I connected with my aunt, his sister, and she said, this is sort of little known fact about our family, is that we have a Métis background, and there's some prominent Métis people in our family that you should read these books on. and so I did, and I started reading about the Honorable James Mackay, John Rowan, the Umfaville family, a number of different people. Some people had more stuff published on them than others. John Rowan and James Mackay were very prominent people in the Métis world politically. John Rowan was sort of known as the Tsar of the Prairies, and was the first chief factor of Edmonton House. So as I started reading about their history, my passion to know more about my own personal history really sparked at that time.
Yeah, so I mean, I just got back from Rocky Mountain Historic Site.
Oh, nice.
And there's a thing on John Rowan there, a whole write-up, so.
Yeah. So
I was reading
he
about him.
he was my great-grandfather times 4. And then his daughter married James Mackay, and they were in the Red River together. Yeah.
So James Mackay, that was 3 back then.
Times 3.
Times 3.
Yeah.
I credit our filmmakers, and I'm not trying to put you on too high of a pedestal, but I've worked with you or seen you enough. You do so much research into the understanding, and I'm guilty of it too often. If we all did the work, if we all did the reading, we would all be kept up. But thank you for helping us understand the story, because though it's your responsibility to really understand it so that you paint a proper picture, there's a lot of history there. And for anybody when they go through this journey, and I think it's really important, anybody who goes through this journey, you may find things that were challenging to become aware of now. And it may have been challenging for those individuals in the past. But I think it's still important that we share the story. And we can't always judge the actions at the time. It's easy to judge them afterwards, but we don't know what that journey was for those individuals. So where does this take you now? Now you're working with an agency that you get a little bit of free rein, it sounds like. Are you finding, because of this personal journey, tell us a little bit about the TV show you were filming before. And again, I know you have lots of products that you're working on right now. And does some of that, as you talk about that, does some of it all of a sudden start to steer you going, I'd like to tell a little bit more of an Indigenous tale?
Yeah, I think overall, I'm drawn to the most impactful stories, no matter what they are. But for myself, and it comes back to, I am a history buff, and I like learning about history, just like Lawrence. I like reading about my personal history, but I also like learning about Métis history, which is what I'm learning about right now. So in the present, I'm very drawn to those stories, and going forward as well. There's a lot of stories that haven't been told for a number of reasons, some purposely, for political reasons. We're in a time right now where we actually can tell these stories, and that's amazing. And so now is when every young filmmaker, old filmmaker, any filmmaker or storyteller should be hopping on and telling these stories, aggressively telling these stories, so that the story of the Métis Nation specifically, in our case, is told.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. It's just like Riel's vision. Our artists will, bring back or reawaken our people, and we know that our storytellers have to do that. And the more and more we encourage them and support them, I think we're better off as a nation as we go along here, because we have so many stories to tell. And I tell young people all the time, like, read books, read as much as you can, and really start to be those ones to tell people about who we are and what we've become, right? And what we're planning for the future. Because so many amazing stories out there, the Willow Bunch Giant to Sophie Morgeau running certainly a gold panning outfit, but you go along all the battles that we've come across and our ancestors have done, and you go all the way to our Métis footprint and why we call this the homeland, and how we touched all these areas and all those kinship networks we set up, and all those stories, Peter Fiddler's journey, David Thompson and his wife, everything has to start being told. But
Well, and read and ask questions, right? That's the expectation of our elders, is to be there to answer those questions for our youth, because it is confusing, right? You'd mentioned before, a lot of the people Lawrence and I have interviewed, and I almost think it's like 90% of the people, they were told, don't have any relationship to your Indigenous culture, just sort of play low, just live in the now. Whereas now, we're starting to see more engagement by the youth going, I'd like to participate more. I'd like to be more aware. There's a safe place for us. And, oddly, 10% of the people we had interviewed in the past, which were older, had indicated, no, I grew up Métis, I celebrated Métis, and we had kitchen parties. I'm like, boy, it's a rare story. And I think it just maybe depends, obviously, on where you were living. But now I'm finding the youth are saying, how do I participate? Well, I just tell them, you don't have to start wearing a sash to school every day. Just come to any event and see the celebration. Become aware of it. Now, you jumped over the fact you did 3 seasons on a show. And you don't have to run down that road, no. But what are the ones that are exciting for you now? Like what because these are big shows, right? You are working with, and this was something that I wasn't super familiar with until, we started to have more awareness on Lawrence and our show. Broadcasters. They just at the day when I was growing up, it was like you either watch CBC or you don't watch CBC. Now we're starting to see more. So how does your relationship with them build? Because you have a lot of successful stories.
Right. Yeah. We've worked a lot with APTN, and APTN is great because they've had an Indigenous mandate long before any other broadcasters obviously had any sort of mandate, which is huge. And they've been pushing that since the beginning in the early 90s. I think they started.
Oh, I didn't realize they were around that long. Wow, fabulous.
Yeah, and have been a backbone of a lot of Indigenous filmmakers, creators, careers, because they've had a platform to broadcast their work. So, for me, it's an honor to work with a broadcaster like APTN. I started with them on a series about ghost hunting.
Here we go. Here's what I was waiting for.
And it's, obviously Indigenous based. There was a lot of spirituality around it. But inevitably we went into sort of historical places, learned about those places, and then spent a couple nights searching for ghosts. And it a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun. And we got to travel across Canada, which it's a vast and amazing country. So I got to see a lot of Canada that I probably wouldn't have seen, especially the East Coast, where you can fly to Frankfurt for cheaper than you can to Halifax.
Yeah. Well, and so much of the stories, every time I watch television, it's the engagement of where are the individuals. I like to look and see places, hey, I've been there, or recognize it, or we all are familiar with the old hotels in Canada, but for some reason we never really do any of the work. So once again, the storyteller is, the director is helping us understand that. How we get there, hey, I'm sure if we listen closely, there's probably a ghost in this room right now. If this is stealing anybody's idea, we're claiming it for ourselves. This will be part of the Lawrence and Ross show. But if it's not an idea, then don't worry about it.
No, we've had this. We've had elders in here blessing.
So we're safe
okay.
then. Okay, good.
Be,
Okay, well then I feel pretty comfortable with that. How do we evaluate movies now? The world has gone streaming. Have you seen the change yourself, or it really doesn't matter? The story's going to get told. Somebody's going to pick it up, or has it changed how you want to make a show?
Oh, well, yeah. With streaming platforms, I think it's changed a lot how you approach a show. Because the desire, I think, for the broadcaster or the streaming platform is for an individual or families to sit down and watch a ton of episodes back to back. Like they want the consumption as much as possible. From my perspective, I could be wrong. But so you want something. So I think the big push right now is the continuation, the serialized continuation of a show where they're not sort of individual. Each episode leads into the next episode, so that you're really tempted to keep watching in that moment and keep it going, so that you're taking more in.
I don't want to give away Lawrence's age, but I didn't want to know until 1 week after 1 week of Sam and Diane ever got together. Right? I liked the idea that you had to wait. You had to pay attention. And that excitement. Thursday's coming up and I get to watch again, and maybe those two are going to get together. Or will Gilligan get off the island? That's more your age, I guess, like 80 or something.
Well, I like the idea of that creative producer piece because Breaking Bad, there's always a bit of a recap, Game of Thrones, all those things that continue on, but you have to watch from beginning to end.
Yeah.
And it does get a little addictive, right?
I like the ones that I know there's like a 3-story or a 3-season arc,
Right.
so that after 3 seasons, it's done.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into something that's 5 or 6 seasons because I feel like it's too daunting, and I know that I'm just going to be slugging through 2 middle seasons that are just there that essentially feel like filler.
Make sure you send all your scathing emails directly to Saxon. No, and I agree. You know, we grow to love that character, and the problem is that you never want that character to end, but it has to, right? And there's only so much you can do, and you know, my nephews have never known a world without The Simpsons, but I don't know what else they could write about. I don't think there's any growth in the characters anymore. And I get it, that's a bit silly. But
Yeah.
something that's been going on that long.
Well, look at that show Succession, where they're waiting for the dad to retire. Well, it's now into getting into the 5th season, right? So you kind of go, okay, well, you know, get a little tired of this guy saying he's going to retire, right? But
Now I want to jump into something because Lawrence, we're gonna transition a little bit from where we were talking about plants.
Okay.
You know, we ran a good whole bunch of episodes where we were talking about the indigenous plants and how they were influencing. And folks, if you want something like that back, you make sure you reach out to us and tell us, get back to including that in there. But you know, what I've started to engage with more, especially having gone to Batoche, is the battles that defined Métis, that defined the us as a culture. And you know, when I present or I talk a lot, the idea that there's the term rebellion and there's the term resistance. And usually people are unaware, and I go, well, depends on the side you were looking at it. If you were on the colonial side, well, these rebellious Métis people. Well, if you're on this side, they were resisting colonialism.
absolutely. Yeah.
So let's talk about one of the battles. How do you guys feel about? I'm going to throw you under the bus. I'm probably going to get this wrong. You know, this happens to me all the time. But victory at Frog Plain, Battle of Seven Oaks. Take me down the road, because you know what? As much as I've been doing a little bit of the reading, I don't have the awareness that you have, or you orate so well about all this stuff, Lawrence. And I'm curious as to Saxon's.
Yeah, well, I've been there. And not
You were
to
at the battle?
Yeah, I was.
Thank you. Okay, that sort of makes sense.
But some of my ancestors were. I mean, Pierre Falcon was, you know, my grandmother was a Falcon, and he wrote the first anthem, and it was Chanson de la Grenouille, which, and you know, the frog, about the plains, right, the victory at Frog Plain, and they call that the 100-year anthem because I guess it was so popular at that time for us resisting the government and making people feel proud to go against it. So yeah, it was held there for a long time, and we use a lot of that teaching when we speak to the young people. But it's also the birth of the nation. You know, our flag in 1816 in June was raised then, and you know, certainly people presume that's a gift from a Scottish politician, which it was at that time. But we raised it in battle as this is our nation. This is the new nation. And, you know, Cuthbert Grant and his vision for what that is. You know, people presume the Métis Nation rose from Riel Jr., but it didn't. It came from before him. And that when the Selkirk settlers started to move in, there was already unrest in that area because of the Pemmican wars against the forts. We started to burn them down because Hudson's Bay Company was kindly saying to the Métis, you're not allowed to sell pemmican to anybody. And they started to monopolize it. And that was one of our ways where we earned income. And that's when the Métis Nation said, no, you know, if you want to take this away from us, well, then we're going to battle against you as forts. And that's when we started to burn everything. And then when the Selkirk settlers moved in to the Red River, then that was really the time where we said, we're a new nation. We've had enough. Now you're bringing all these people in. And, you know, well, a Métis as, you know, fine marksmen, you know, we're in a certain area near the Battle of Seven Oaks, and when Governor Semple ordered a shot to be fired, they took the first shot at us, and we ended up killing a bunch of those settlers, right?
Lawrence, where have I been? That was fabulous. You covered a whole bunch of names. Now I'm going to have to research just to
But
make sure
then
you're
the
correct.
thing was they all got arrested.
Yeah.
Right? And they were held in Montreal, including Cuthbert Grant, and the Coleman Report in 1821. So imagine 1816 and 1821, that's 5 years where we were held as criminals. And they were totally exonerated of all charges. And that's when Cuthbert Grant had just redefined that we are a new nation, and the forts back then in 1821 just crumbled. HBC and Northwest Company, the furs dwindled. They amalgamated together, and the fur trade was over, and the birth of the Métis Nation happened, irregardless, in 1821 after that Coleman Report.
You know what's crazy is the idea that we celebrated, I think it was like this last year, the iPhone's been around for 10 years or something like that. That time of that battle towards the Red River Resistance is about 70 years.
Yeah.
So great, we had this. There was 70 years to try and get to this point where all of a sudden we really stood up. And we are still trying to stand up today and say we need to be involved in consultation. We need to be engaged.
That's right.
We need our relationship with the socioeconomic aspect of our culture and in our community. There's such a history there. Saxon, how would you capture, or do you just tell little bits at a time? And would Lawrence and I be fighting for a head role?
Well, Lawrence might.
Yeah, Lawrence, he's got the
No,
beard already.
yeah.
I don't have that.
Just sitting here listening to Lawrence, there's so many, specific stories that you could pull from. I really like, just on a surface note, I really like focusing on why the Métis were such a strong military might. They were the military might of the Northwest, and they proved that in that battle. And it probably was a moment that changed, definitely from the Dominion's perspective of who they were dealing with. And why, and Lawrence, you touched on it, why they were such good marksmen, and because they were used to going out in a military fashion, hunting buffalo, and they could load their guns. They'd use their mouth, and they could load their guns while they were riding and fire while they were riding.
That's right.
So their skill was unmatched by anybody. So, and to me, one of the really interesting little nuggets in that story also is Governor Semple and just how bullheaded and incompetent he was, and how much he underestimated I guess it would have been the Bois Brûlés, mainly at that time, before they raised the flag and the Métis Nation was born. And he went out and just thought he would take them down, and he got absolutely slaughtered because of it.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's when, people always presume, and then they went through, certainly a bit of a dark time after that, during those 5 years, because we were viewed as the criminals in Europe, right? But we weren't. We were just defending our valley. And, Grand Coteau came after that, and then it just, certainly led into the 1867 sort of rebellion, resistance when he started that. But, people underestimated us through time, and every single battle we've kind of won along the years up to Batoche, right? And I find it very interesting that we're not telling those stories in sort of a mass production or television series, because I think I would be interested to watch it, how this country was actually, this western part of this land was actually founded, right?
Well, in conversations we've had before, Saxon, you have a strong relationship with the Métis community. You have a strong relationship with telling the stories. I want people out there to hear, this is your opportunity. Reach out to our office, and we'll help you connect with Saxon. We'll help you connect, with 3-Story Pictures, so that we can start getting more of these stories out there. This is important. And, we have the ability now and the opportunity. We are celebrating Indigenous culture. It's still a challenge, right? In the industry right now, people don't understand that there's more than in the term Indigenous that represents many different people, and we need to be a part of these conversations. And these are great stories.
Yeah, I think that's a really big note. And I'll maybe just add to that a little bit, in that from my perspective, I didn't get to grow up in the Métis culture at all, and so I'm learning, and I'm taking my kids to events. We just went to the AGA, which had a lot of kid-friendly stuff in it.
Yeah.
There was face painting. There was my eldest son actually did a Machif lesson, which was really cool, and it was really well done, and it was very hands-on and engaged and physical, like you'd be moving around and learning Machif words at the same time. But so I'm in that exploration, and that can be part of the story too. If you're a filmmaker and you're exploring your Métis background and you're just discovering it. I'm working on a series right now with APTN about James Mackay, my ancestor, who was a commissioner for the signing of the numbered treaties. So he was there helping to translate initially, and then he became a commissioner. So his career sort of rose with the treaty signing. So I'm exploring his role in that, whether he was, what his intentions were and whether those are good or bad. And it's never black and white, of course. No. There's so much gray. So it's kind of a controversial way to go about it, but he was a great man, but there was also two sides to every story. So I get to explore that through a docuseries as well.
And I imagine you will find, again, we've just talked about it a little earlier, there'll be some history there that you have to look and go, wow, somebody made a decision. Mm-hmm. And in a way, at least a decision was made. And now we get to evaluate it and look back. I think that's just one of the important things. We have to continue to look back. Now, gentlemen, only recently, and I don't know how well it was celebrated, but Batoche. Now, essentially, a certain amount of land was donated to the Métis people. And it doesn't really seem as though I'm unfamiliar with, was it all of Batoche in the sense of the whole national park and that celebrated area, or was it a portion of it so that the Métis have this relationship again with the community? I think that is one of the first steps that has to happen. But now there's a big responsibility. The Métis have to share that story. We have to figure out a way to continue to have our relationship with Canada, with the parks, and share that story.
Well, Batoche was an original Métis settlement, and the person who's named Batoche, that was his land. That was his, and we did all the freighting along that river for years before the Battle of Batoche even happened. But it was the last sort of stronghold that we had. I mean, back then there was a church and all those things that they built as Métis people. But those are places we sought for refuge during that one battle.
Well, and at that time, every family had access through ownership of land to the water. So they were a part of the ability to be part of the economy. And then the Dominion moves in and goes, well, you know what? We're going to take this back.
Well, once we lost the battle, then they moved everybody out and took it. And that's what we've kind of reclaimed, is that area back for the Métis families again. And it's given to the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan because they hold that jurisdiction, right? But, certainly it's a place that now we can say this is, my ancestors buried there.
And right? There's Pambrun's there, and I'm trying to talk to my dad and find out exactly how that relationship.
That's right. But now I can actually go there and say, this is our site now. This is not a national historic site anymore. It's the Métis.
So Lawrence and I will be setting up a coffee shop just on the corner of Batoche and the river. I don't know, do we have that allowance?
Well, I'll probably have to fix that road.
Okay, and it's about a 20-minute drive off the highway. So folks, order your coffee ahead of time because it's
dusty.
Yeah, it's going to be dusty by the time you come to get it. Yeah. And so your thoughts. My concern is, and it's just, how far back do we go? At some point, somebody's going to say, well, technically, on the back of this buffalo hide I found, there was my family's name, and maybe we own this too. How do we manage that? How do we manage the conversation of when somebody just says, well, you know what, I think my family owned that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, how do we reclaim? I mean, the script system in itself was the largest land swindle in North America.
Right.
And how are we going to deal with, or how is Canada going to deal with that now that we're at their table? Reminding them. I mean, it's even written in the Métis Nation Accord that we signed with the Prime Minister that, they would acknowledge that the script system happened, and how are we going to reclaim all those certain things that were taken from us.
And and Saxon, you might know this unless you listen to all 90 podcasts, but it was probably like 92 podcasts ago. I thought it was script. I didn't realize it was script.
Yeah.
And so in this journey myself, I'm constantly learning, right? Lawrence, you're always bringing up these tidbits as we
I like when
continue to
people
go.
say script because
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I guess we're in a movie.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of it. Like 5 years ago, I didn't know what the heck script was.
100%.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it existed. And then, as you dig into it, you realize, wow.
Well, it'd be like your family if you held a piece of land for
Yeah.
generations. Canada comes in and says, well, now you have to reapply for that land.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a system that we have. And it was so bureaucratic, there was no way you would actually pass.
And they were
designed
separating
get
families.
it back.
And
It was designed to take it away from the Métis.
And it went to the surveyors. It went to those people that got in line before you.
who were physically waiting outside the tent.
That's right.
To essentially claim it, right? And would claim it if the family didn't come and sign their names. They would claim it, or they would, as the family member steps out and would offer, I guess, a chunk of change to purchase it in some way.
Yeah, and then you went to the government and said, well, where do I go now? And they say, well, you go into that ditch over there at the road allowance.
the road allowance, yeah.
And you can live there.
Yeah.
Well, and I think even just from the conversation amongst three of us, that idea of script needs to be told.
Yeah.
That we need to understand that. And when you just held a piece of paper and your English probably wasn't good, but your Michif was probably great, and nobody really explained to you that this piece of paper, this is the value you have. Well, sure, I'll hand it over for enough food that'll last me for the winter because that's my priority at the time. And now the generations upon generations of families afterwards lost that opportunity.
That's right.
Because traditionally, the Métis way of claiming land would have been to something as easy as laying out some logs at the corners and saying, this is essentially where the land I use. And it wasn't really the same sense of, I own this. It's more, I'm using this for the purpose of, for the greater good here.
And how far down the line do you look when, life expectancies were only this long and you were just trying to manage almost from day to day? Yeah.
Yeah.
We take it for granted just how easy it is right now. And at that time, as people were moving across Canada, and well, there's your land, and you either make enough food to live on it, or you figure out another way to beg, borrow, and steal, I guess, in order to survive the winter.
What's interesting about consultation and engagement, even landowners that we have here in Alberta, when they say, my family, I've owned this land since 1885, right? We always go, how did they get it?
Yeah, yeah,
Right? There's always that question, right?
yeah.
Well, and that's a pretty heavy topic because there's truth and reconciliation, and then there's giving back.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody wants to give back.
True.
But
There's-
if you fought for one day in the Canadian Army, you were given a piece of land in 1885.
Oh, I'm studying the Wolseley expedition, the Red River expedition, and essentially they were volunteer military Orangemen coming from Ontario out to put down the Red River resistance.
Right.
Volunteer. They were actually, they were paid, as we know, in gold and in land.
yeah.
And they were given their promised whatever acreage they needed to farm, and that was essentially it. So,
Well, and how many people were promised, regardless of when immigration happened, how many people were promised something? And then in the end, there's only so much to go around. So,
Yeah, that's right. So, I think the script system, all these battles, all these things are wonderful, I guess, movie content, fact-based fiction, and let's just start telling those stories, getting it out there.
And the challenge is that it's so vast. So you really, from my perspective, it's finding the characters within those stories and who are the individuals that stand out, exploring them, and then telling the bigger story through that character. And that's usually the challenge. And the fun part as well.
and thank you to APTN for continuing to sponsor, these kind of shows, broadcasting these kind of shows, because if I totally support the notion of Canadian content. We're a small nation. We need this. Otherwise, we are going to be the first people to lose our identity against our American friends and families. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus on that one. Let's, gentlemen, And I want to pick your brain because I was looking through a couple of videos in the past and I found an interview you had done. And this is fun because Top Gun just came out. You'd done an interview with Val Kilmer.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
yeah.
And, when it comes to the celebrities you meet, and I have a question, and I wanted to lead into, a curious conversation about the challenging loss of a successful artist, Anne Hesh, in the movie community, but I'm not super familiar. I'm familiar with the music world a bit, but not in that world of celebrity. So when you interview, is this like, here's a feather in my hat, or this is pretty fabulous, or is it, no, I'm doing my job, I'm helping them tell their story, they're the celebrity. Where does that fit?
Well, I think when it's someone that's as prominent as someone like Val Kilmer, that everybody knows who that is, then yeah, it is a bit of a feather in the cap scenario. But at the same time, when you get down to the brass tacks, you just want to have a conversation with someone, and you want to find out who they are and how they tick and what motivates them. In that case, he was a pretty interesting character.
I bet she was. And I apologize, it was a couple months ago, but what was the movie?
This was, oh God, how long ago was this?
Was it
15,
Gone?
20 years?
Gone or?
No, The Thaw.
The Thaw.
It's science fiction.
And the thing that's crazy is when I looked up the video, it wasn't hard to find. So to our listeners out there, look this up. It was fun. The interview with Val Kilmer and The Thaw, and that was, Saxon's interview with him, that regardless of what the movie was, this guy was a movie icon, even at that time. And then he just became bigger and bigger and bigger. And the guy is still holding a role in Top Gun, even though a lot of it was done sort of artificial intelligence. But
he was one of those people that had a larger than life persona. You're around him and you feel the energy or aura coming off of him immediately. He was could be a bit abrasive at times. I saw him just sort of interacting with other people, and he has a strong personality. He was extremely nice to me, which was great. And he's very intelligent, and he would answer some questions, and I would sort of think to myself, okay, did we get that answer? I don't know if we did. And then it would be back in the edit where I realized that he was sort of going around it in this way and then coming back and answering it in a very long, sort of drawn out way, but a very insightful way. So, yeah.
And now Anne Hesh, here my concern is that these celebrities never get any privacy. Should they? Is this what happens when you get there? Nobody comes up to Lawrence and I and asks us any threatening questions. I threaten Lawrence all the time, I guess.
Yeah. Did.
Well, I guess that's true. Yeah, but you're in a role where they want to also ask political questions and such like that.
Yeah.
Nobody ever comes to me and, how's your acting going on, Ray? Well, I guess I'm not too concerned about that. It's one of those, I guess I got to get out there a little bit more. But, as she sadly went, crashed, sounds like she had a second crash that day. So, God only knows. But do they get privacy? And boy, how difficult was this decision? And I think she's done the right thing, that the family's willing to share her organs, and allow for this loss to hopefully find some positivity. But boy, the world of celebrity, we've talked about Will Smith's slap, and do they ever get space?
Yeah, I think if you live in the spotlight, then you really run the risk of dying in the spotlight.
Dying in the spotlight, that's
as well. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, and of course, each individual circumstance dictates that. And I think that's just part of what they do.
I mean, that's part of celebrity. Can you help us get Tom Cruise on the show next week?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so
we're like this.
We're going to go through Saxon's phone later, Lawrence, and we're going to try.
Oh no, you don't even need Tom Cruise. You can use AI now.
That's right. You're right.
He has an AI.
We need someone
already.
who can do Tom Cruise's voice, and then we'll just AI his face on top of it.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, they're already doing it, right? So.
Gentlemen, I think we've come to the end of our conversation. There's always more. We could always talk sports, and we always do. I really wanted to focus, because we had this opportunity to talk to Saxon about, the music or the movie world and production and broadcasters and how these things work. So when you have questions, make sure you send them out to us, tsw@thesqueakywheel.ca. You can always email Lawrence directly, Lawrence@thesqueakywheel.ca. You can find me, Ross@thesqueakywheel.ca. squeakywheel.ca. From behind the scenes, we really appreciate everybody who pays attention and listens to us. Continue to share the conversation. Look up 3 pictures, 3-story pictures. Look up Saxon. You know, we're going to find more opportunities for him. If you have ideas out there of things that you want to be filmed regarding the Métis, regarding the Indigenous culture conversation, make sure you shoot them our way. Gentlemen, I can't say thank you enough. Thank you for the conversation. And from everybody here, folks, keep the wheel squeaking. The Squeaky Wheel is brought to you by the Squeaky Wheel Company, co-hosted by the President, Lawrence Gervais, from M&A Region 3, and the Captain, Ross Memphis Pambrun. Our program is broadcast from Calgary, in Region 3 of the Métis Nation of Alberta, which is part of the historic Métis Nation homeland. We also acknowledge these lands are the traditional territories of Treaty 7, Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda, with whom we share this land on the basis of our historical and ongoing relationships. You can always reach us for comment about our programming by email at tsw@thesqueakywheel.ca or find us on our website, www.squeakywheel.ca, and our socials. For our comments, it is our focus to recognize all of our First Nations and Indigenous friends, share connection with Métis settlements, and listen to and show respect to our Métis brothers and sisters and families. Here at the Squeaky Wheel, we give thanks to our elders for their guidance and to Mother Earth for her time she allows us to be here and share her bounty. From all of us at the Squeaky Wheel, Tansi.